Hi, I'm Mary Thane. This is Barely Conscious, and I'm here today with Noah Khan.
Howdy.
And today we're going to be talking about the night witches of Soviet Russia. It's 1941. Imagine you are a young woman living in Soviet Russia.
Gotcha.
World War II has been going on for 3 years. All the men are off fighting in the war, and you're sick of sewing things and donating things, and you don't really feel like you're actually helping the war. You can feel it? You got it?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Then you hear news of an all-women regiment in the army called the 588th.
Sign me up.
This is an all-female regiment. 2,000 women applied for this regiment and 2 others, which were also all-female, and only 400 were accepted. The ages range from 17 to 26. These were very young women. And the 588th Regiment were trained just like the men, treated just like the men, and had to do all the things the men did. But they had to learn it all in 6 months.
Wow.
Which is crazy, because normally you would have 2 to 3 years to learn that. But they had to do it in 6 months, because the Soviet Union was short on soldiers. These women bomber pilots who belonged to the 588th Regiment, they were feared and loathed by the Germans for very specific reasons. They were called Nachthexen. That's what the Germans called them, which translates to night witches.
Okay.
And any German who downed a night witch, so shot them out of the sky, was immediately awarded the Iron Cross.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah. And for good reason. They used biplanes that were normally used for crop dusting. They were called the Polikarpov, or PO2s.
So they just strapped some guns on those babies, or what?
Basically. So, I mean, they were used for crop dusting, and they were loud, and why the army actually had them was they were training planes. Nobody wanted to use them. They sucked. But that was the only thing they were given. They were very rickety. They made a ton of noise when they flew, and they were made out of plywood and canvas. They had no heating. Like, it was awful. So they really didn't have, like, any good technology whatsoever. The men had things like radio and radar and like actual maps and stuff like that. The night witches, they didn't have radios, they didn't have radar, and the way that they, calculated their flight path were with maps and rulers. Really old-fashioned stuff, especially even for World War II. Even worse, they didn't carry any parachutes at all. There's different theories for why that was the case. Apparently there's not like a clear one answer. Some people have said it was because they were too heavy. Some people have said that it was because they were too expensive and the army didn't want to waste money on them. But then some people said that they flew so low in the first place they wouldn't be able to open the parachutes even if they did bail out. So we don't really know why, but we do know they didn't carry any. But they did have their advantages.
Yes.
Their maximum speed was slower than the stalling speed of Nazi planes. So these planes were slow enough that in order for the Germans to get down to their speed, their planes would stall, so they would stop and they would crash.
Oh man.
Yeah, but the big problem was that they made a frick ton of noise when they flied, right? You can't really be secretive. You can't, like, attack all that well if your planes make a ton of noise.
Yeah.
So they operated in stealth mode, meaning as they approached German targets, they would idle their engines, which essentially meant they just turned them off and glided their way to the base or wherever they were going to attack.
Did that work well?
It did. It worked extremely well. The thing about the planes, I mean, they were really bad. They were crappy planes. But they didn't use radios, so radio locators couldn't pick them up. They couldn't be picked up on radar because they had no heat trace because they were so cold. It was like the most miserable time for these women, but at the same time, it was almost impossible for them to be sighted.
Wow.
Yeah. Even crazier, they only had about 40 planes in the regiment themselves, and you could only fit 2 women per plane because it was just a crop duster. You couldn't fit 5 people in there. They would fly 8 or more missions every night because they had such small numbers and because the planes could only carry 2 bombs at a time. Otherwise, it would just crash. Even that they had two, and they would fly extremely low to the ground. So all in all, these were like the worst planes ever. And the only times when they could go out were at night. And that was it. Because of their idling tactic, the Germans would have no idea if they were attacking. The only sound you could hear was like the whooshing sound of the like tarps that were on this plane. And by then it was way too late. So the sounds reminded the Germans of witches' broomsticks, and that's how they got the name the Night Witches.
That's terrifying.
So they had the worst technology in the world, the worst way to go about everything, the worst planes, the worst...
Leave it to Soviet Russia, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. They were extremely successful. It's insane to me how successful they were. So because their planes were so slow and the Germans' planes were too fast, they were incredibly good at weaving. So a German plane would come toward them and try to attack them. And because their planes were so slow, they could make way sharper turns. And the Germans would have to swing around and completely turn around. By the time that happened, the Night Witches would be able to attack and shoot them a little bit. The only way the Germans could ever see them, or like sense that they were there, were searchlights, which were actually a really big problem for them. The Germans at Stalingrad developed what the Russians called a flak circus, flax being the guns, and searchlights, which were hidden during the day. And they would put them in circles around probable targets so that the Night Witches would, try to attack. The Night Witches developed their own technique so as to deal with the problem. They decided to start flying in groups of 3. 2 would go in and, on purpose attract the attention of the Germans. So then the flat guns would aim at them, the searchlights would point at them, and then the 2 pilots would separate very quickly, flying in opposite directions, maneuvering wildly in the sky to shake off the searchlight operators. And then the 3rd pilot, she would fly in through the dark path cleared by the 2 others. She would drop her bombs, and then they would do it again. So that they could drop 6 bombs at once, and then turn around and go back. Refill up on more bombs, and go back, do it again.
Huh.
And it worked really well. So the Germans really had no way to, protect themselves, right? They would send out planes, and the planes would get shot down faster than they could shoot down any Night Witches. And the searchlight thing, that only worked for maybe a day, and that was it. I mean, it was insane. Like, that's absolutely terrifying to have to fly into the line of fire deliberately to do that. But it worked really, really, really well.
I mean, with Germany being the fatherland and everything, I bet this really hurt their feelings.
Yeah, definitely. They hated him. Now, their leader, the leader of the 588th, was Marina Raskova. She was the first woman to become an aviator for the Soviet Union. She was known for being the Russian version of Amelia Earhart. She petitioned to Joseph Stalin to make these regiments. She was in charge of all 3. And she gave a speech convincing the Soviet Union that women could be used in the war and that they should be. The Soviet Union was the first to allow women to fly combat missions, ever. There were other governments allowing them to be involved as like nurses or just bring supplies to places, but none of them were allowed to be in combat. And the Soviet Union was the first place to do that.
So this Marina Raskova, what's her story? I haven't really heard of her before.
Well...
Hello.
Hi! If you could just introduce yourself and what you do.
Hi, I'm Pamela Dell, and I'm a kids book author and freelance editor, and I write a lot of extra materials for literacy programs for kids, mostly in around 5th through 8th grade.
Author of The Soviet Night Witches, Brave Women Bomber Pilots of World War II. What do you know about Marina Raskova?
Yeah, she was amazing. I mean, she was a very disciplined woman, and she, in fact, I read a thing that was interesting that said that they had brought all their nice dresses and fancy clothes from home, and one night when they were supposed to be studying, that Marina Raskova discovered they were putting on their clothes and walking around in front of the mirror, like their old life, I suppose. And she made them send all their clothes back home so that they would apply themselves to study. So she was very intense and so skilled herself, But she started out as a young girl wanting to be, I think, an opera singer. She wanted to be an
Oh.
yeah, and then her family didn't really have enough money, and um, she also was ill, and so she was kind of forced to choose something that was more practical. So she studied chemistry, and then she finally became interested in aviation in 1931, I think, when she was working for the drafting department at the Air Force, what was called the Air Force Engineering Academy, and she became the first Russian woman to qualify as an aviation navigator when she graduated from the research institute where she was going to school. And she was known kind of as the Russian Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, and she was on a postage stamp and everything. She went on that long distance, over 4,000 and I think 31-mile continuous flight with two other women in the crew.
Right.
They were crossing from Moscow, I believe, to the far edge of southern Siberia. And before they actually got to their destination, they ran out of fuel. Marina Raskova, she had to bail out because she was the navigator, and so she sat in the nose of the plane. And so she bailed out. The others went on, and they crashed somewhere else, but they both survived. But she was you might have read this too. She was lost in the Russian wilderness, 10 days,
Wow.
and without any food really. I mean, she probably had whatever she could find in that Siberian climate. I don't know. And then she was rescued and reunited with her crew, but the one thing that isn't really mentioned very frequently, you don't read about this much, is that in the rescue mission to find them and to rescue them, 16 men died because there was an air collision between their plane and some other plane, I guess.
Wow.
So, and it was never publicized because they didn't, the Soviets felt like this would detract from the celebrations of, honoring these three women. And
Right.
they all received what was called the Order of Lenin and what's called the Gold Star Medal. They were the first women to be awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union.
Whoa.
Yeah. She kept leading the regiment until a flying accident where she was forced to crash land and she died. But she was one of the most respected and honored generals of her time. In the end, 261 women served in the regiment, flying more than 30,000 missions in total. They took 24,000 combat flights and dropped 23,000 tons of bombs. They lost only 30 pilots out of all the years they existed, and 24 of their flyers were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Raskova, the mother of the movement, died in 1943 when she was finally sent to the front line. Her plane never made it. She was given the very first state funeral of World War II, and her ashes were buried in Kremlin. If it wasn't for her, and it wasn't for the Night Witches, Germany might not have surrendered so easily. They truly were very important to World War II, and it's amazing that they are hardly mentioned in history.
When there was a victory parade, they weren't allowed to be in it. So, a typical kind of male preference sort of thing. You can't let these little girls. They were the most honored and the most decorated. I read something that they had. They were the most highly decorated unit in the
really?
Soviet Air Force, but they did not get to join in the victory parade. And the reason that they gave, a totally ridiculous excuse, was that their planes were too slow. The interesting thing to me, too, is that at the end of the war, these women who had independent lives and done things that to them were exciting and outside of their normal humdrum everyday life were pretty much forced back to their old life, most of them, in both the United States and in Russia. And how do you adjust if you have to go back to washing diapers when you were, suiting up planes?
Yeah.
Or whatever, yeah.